father was back and forth in jail, like he was locked up most of the time, and then he passed away.
Do you know what he went to jail for?
No, not exactly. Yeah, no.
He was in jail for a while?
Yeah, well, like, I met him when I was like 8 or 7 or something. He was in jail all while, you see what I'm saying?
In the tough streets of Chicago, where making it out is a challenge and every day feels like survival, Ken Vaughn and his family weren't living a normal life at all. The Bennetts were deep in the chaos of the streets, surrounded by risky choices and dangerous moves that shaped how Ken Vaughn grew up. From a young age, he was caught up in a world that pushed him into serious street activity before most teens even had a chance to figure life out. The Bennett family story runs deep. Walter Silk. Bennett, known around Ada Park as a street boss with real influence, built his name through power and loyalty. His son, David Ken Vaughn Bennett, took all the pain from his early life and turned it into a mission to earn respect on the streets. But that same drive would lead him down a rough path that ended too soon at just 26. We're diving into the Bennett family legacy, how a father's sudden loss changed everything and shaped his son's mindset forever. We'll uncover Silk's rise to power in Chicago's toughest neighborhoods, his connection with Vaughn's mother, Taisha, and how their complicated love story unfolded while the streets stayed heated with drama. Silk's sudden passing sparked something wild in Ken Vaughn. His mom struggled to keep him grounded, especially after losing the man he looked up to. We're about to break down the real people connected to Ken Vaughn's street history, the reasons behind those situations, and how each incident added to his name as one of Chicago's most talked about young figures. By the end of this, you'll see how deep family pain, neighborhood influence, and loyalty to the streets shaped a rapper who turned his rough reality into music that hit hard across the city. And now, his mom is living comfortably off the success of those very tracks that once told the story of his life in the trenches. Ken Vaughn, born David Daquan Bennett on August 9th, 1994, came into a world already set against him. From day one, the environment around him was unpredictable and raw. But to really understand Vaughn's story, we gotta rewind to his parents. Two people trying to find love and peace in Chicago's South Side, a place where passion and danger were always just one step apart. Vaughn grew up in an area known as Killer Ward, sitting around West 78th and South Hermitage. But don't get it twisted, this wasn't your average neighborhood where kids just played ball or ran around with no worries. This was territory watched closely by major street crews like the Disciples and the P-Stones, and the name Killer Ward wasn't given by accident. In this part of the city, hearing chaos outside was normal. It was part of the rhythm of daily life. Kids had to grow up fast, learning how to move smart before they even finished learning their ABCs. That constant tension shaped Vaughn's mindset from a young age. Teachers in Ken Vaughn's neighborhood schools saw things most people couldn't imagine. Kids barely 8 or 9 years old.
Nah, it ain't stopping nothing. Ain't nothing. We gotta move me something. Say I gotta move. It's really just.
We're already throwing up hand signs, talking about what went down the night before, and learning how to make it home safe in a city that never slept. But what made Ken Vaughn stand out from the rest wasn't just his surroundings. It was his family roots. He wasn't some random kid just trying to make it out. He was part of the Bennett legacy, a name that already carried major weight before he even learned how to spell it. Ken Vaughn was born into a story that had already started long before him. His father, Walter Silk Bennett, was a name that echoed through Chicago's South Side. Silk wasn't just another street figure. He was a legend who earned respect from everyone who knew how the game worked. The Bennett name opened doors in certain places, but it also brought eyes, whispers, and expectations everywhere they went. For Vaughn, that pressure became a part of who he was, like he was born with a reputation he couldn't escape. Silk was no small-time player. He was operating at a level way beyond street corners or small hustles. He dealt with serious people who had been in the game for years. And somewhere in that fast life, he met Aisha, the woman who would become Ken Vaughn's mother and his heart. She wasn't blind to what came with loving a man like Silk. She knew exactly what kind of life she was signing up for. The world Vaughn was born into was built on survival, loyalty, and status. In that environment, tough decisions were part of everyday life. Those same conditions would later shape every move Vaughn made as he grew up, influencing his mindset, his attitude, and even his music. Walter Bennett himself came from humble beginnings. Born on October 28, 1974, in a city that never gave handouts. Family stories say that his smooth moves and cool personality earned him the name Silk. Walter Bennett's story started with a twist of fate. He was born right at home on smooth silk sheets, and from that exact moment, everyone started calling him Silk. It was like the world already knew he was meant to stand out. Growing up in Ada Park on Chicago's South Side wasn't easy. This wasn't some quiet suburban spot where people worried about lawns or fancy cars. Nah, this was a neighborhood where survival was the main goal, and every day came with a new test. Silk's early life was surrounded by struggle and tough lessons. His biological father wasn't really around. Word was, he might have been locked away or gone too soon, like so many others caught up in the same cycle. But his stepfather, Big Reggie, stepped in and filled that space with authority, street knowledge, and influence that ran deep across the South Side. Big Reggie wasn't your average hustler. He was known, respected, and had connections that carried real weight.
What's your ID number?
Yeah, well. All right, quit. What you warming up like?
What's your ID number?
2014.
When he walked through the neighborhood, people noticed he was the kind of man who could solve problems with a phone call or make new ones with a single decision. Under his guidance, Silk learned the ins and outs of the street world, how to handle business quietly, how to move without bringing unwanted attention, and how to demand respect without raising his voice. Reggie taught Silk how to build trust, settle conflicts, and move smart. Lessons that would stick with him forever. The biggest thing he taught, though, was how to stay alive in a world that could switch up on you in a heartbeat. Those teachings molded Silk into more than just another young man trying to get by. They turned him into someone people wanted to follow. Even as a teen, Silk stood out. He had that mix of intelligence, charisma, and confidence that made him a natural leader. People saw something different in him. He wasn't just another street kid chasing fast money. He had real ambition. On top of that, Silk was a gifted athlete, especially on the basketball court. For a while, it looked like sports might be his ticket out. College scouts started noticing his smooth style and skills, and whispers started flying about scholarships that could have changed his entire future. But the streets had a whole different plan for Walter Silk Bennett. The quick money, power, and instant respect that came from that lifestyle pulled him in faster than any dream of college hoops ever could. The truth is, Silk understood the game on a level that most people never even touch. He saw patterns, read people, and always stayed 2 steps ahead. Silk wasn't the kind of man who moved wild or without purpose. He knew how to protect himself when needed, but his real strength came from his mind. He wasn't about chaos, he was about control. He played by his own rules, using street smarts and strategy like a chess player mapping every move. Early on, he learned that trust could get you in trouble out there, but respect? That's what kept you standing tall. And Silk had that respect everywhere he went. Not just because people feared him, but because they believed in him. He had a way of lifting up everyone around him, making even the smallest moves turn into big wins. People followed him not out of fear, but because he made success look effortless. After spending almost a decade behind bars on different charges, Silk came out a completely transformed man. Prison didn't break him, it sharpened him. He walked out with a plan, a mission, and credibility that no amount of money could buy. He wasn't trying to start over from scratch. He was ready to take everything he learned and rebuild smarter than before. When Silk connected with the Black disciples, it wasn't about safety or finding a place to belong. It was about partnership and power. They saw his potential immediately, and together they built something that stretched across neighborhoods, bringing in serious money and influence that rivaled legit businesses. What made Silk a legend wasn't just his hustle. It was how organized he was. He wasn't some corner kid hustling for lunch money or trying to stay afloat. He was running a full-scale operation, structured, strategic, and almost corporate in the way he moved. Silk Bennett's record told the story of a man who handled business seriously and stood firm on the choices he made. His past showed multiple arrests connected to high-level street dealings, not small-time moves, but major operations that showed just how deep he was in the game. This wasn't about corner sales. Silk was moving with purpose, organization, and real influence. He also faced a few charges tied to protection and self-defense, proof that he knew how to stay ready in a world where problems couldn't always be settled with words. A couple of assault charges were on his record too, showing that when it came down to it, Silk didn't back away from conflict. But here's what made him different. The number of those cases was small compared to everything else, which showed he preferred brains over brute force. He knew unnecessary drama brought heat from the law, and that kind of attention could ruin everything he built. Silk wasn't reckless, he was calculated. He believed that staying calm, thinking smart, and keeping business smooth was the key to survival. What really set him apart, though, wasn't just what was written on paper. It was how he carried himself in the streets. The respect he earned came from the way he treated people, how he led, and how he kept his word even when it cost him something. In Chicago's street world, there's a big difference between being feared and being respected. And Silk knew that better than anyone. Anybody could scare people for a moment. But earning true respect, that took consistency, honesty, and leadership. Silk had all of that. Plus, natural charm that made people want to work with him. His operation wasn't only about product, it was about power, structure, and influence.
I don't think I'm at the highest point yet, but since so far, right now,
Yeah,
as
so
we doing
far at this point.
right now, right? Yeah, that's the highest. This the highest I've ever been.
He understood that real control came from running things like a business, managing people, maintaining relationships, and keeping loyalty tight. He wasn't just another player in the game, he was a full-blown CEO of his own underground organization. Silk's team was built like a real company. He had lookouts making sure everything stayed clear, transporters keeping business moving, protectors who made sure things stayed in order, and trusted lieutenants managing different areas across the city. Everyone had a role, and Silk ran it all with precision and respect. When he linked up with the Black Disciples, it wasn't just a handshake deal. It was a power move. They saw his value instantly. Silk brought structure, brains, and a sense of professionalism that elevated everyone around him. Silk Bennett's rise to the top didn't come without danger, because in the streets, success always comes with a price. The higher you climb, the more eyes start watching, waiting for a chance to take what's yours. There's always someone ready to challenge the throne, someone who thinks they can outsmart the boss, and someone who wants to make their name by going at the man in charge. Silk knew that reality all too well, but Silk was smart. He didn't move scared, and he didn't move sloppy either. He understood that being too paranoid could break you just as fast as being careless, so he built his circle carefully. Everyone in his crew was handpicked for loyalty, skill, and heart. He didn't surround himself with random people. He built a family. Everyone in that circle knew one thing: if Silk fell, they all fell too. Their success and survival were tied directly to his. The money running through Silk's operation was serious. We're talking hundreds of thousands moving through the network on the regular, real street revenue that could change lives. This wasn't just enough to buy cars or houses. This was the kind of money that could build generational wealth if handled right. Silk wasn't just chasing fast cash. He was trying to create something lasting, something that could secure his family's future for decades. But with that kind of money came problems most people couldn't imagine. Silk had to manage relationships with suppliers who expected consistency, settle disagreements between crew members without showing favorites, and deal with police attention without letting it shake the foundation. On top of that, he had to stay alert for betrayal, because in that world, trust could turn to trouble overnight. Still, through all that chaos, every king needs a queen, and for Silk, that queen was Aisha. But don't get it twisted. This wasn't some movie romance with soft music and happy endings. This was love built in the middle of Chicago's hardest streets, where loyalty was tested daily and peace never lasted long. Their relationship played out in a world where passion, danger, and ambition mixed together like fire and gasoline. Aisha wasn't some sheltered girl who didn't know what came with the life. She had grown up right there in the same neighborhoods. She knew the code, the risks, and the reality of being connected to someone like Silk. She'd seen men fall trying to play a game they didn't understand, and she knew exactly what she was stepping into when she chose him. But there was something about Silk that drew her in. That confidence, that power, that undeniable energy that made people stop and listen whenever he walked into a room. He wasn't loud, but his presence spoke volumes. When Silk talked, people paid attention. When he made moves, people followed. That type of power could pull anyone in. And for Aisha, it was magnetic. Their connection burned hot from the start. Fast, passionate, and intense. They loved hard, argued harder, and lived like every moment could be their last. Silk Bennett was the kind of man who carried power everywhere he went. He made serious moves, took big risks, and held the weight of an entire operation on his back every single day. But when he was with Tisha, everything changed. She was the one person who could make him drop his guard, something no one else could ever get away with. Around her, Silk didn't have to be the boss or the strategist. Behind closed doors, away from all the chaos of the streets, he could finally breathe. With Tisha, Silk was just Walter, a man who wanted peace, family, and a hurt at building something that would last beyond the streets. He dreamed of a future where his kids could grow up safe, free from the same dangers that had shaped his life. But loving a man like Silk wasn't easy. It came with a heavy price. His lifestyle meant constant motion, constant pressure, and constant danger. Tisha lived every day with uncertainty. There were nights when he didn't come home, times when every knock on the door made her heart race. Was it good news? Was it trouble? She never knew. Living like that could break most people, but not Tisha. She was built different. She understood exactly who Silk was and what came with being by his side. She saw what others didn't, the loyalty, the intelligence, and the deep sense of protection that guided everything he did. To her, those same traits that made him powerful in the streets also made him the kind of man worth standing beside no matter what. Their love wasn't built on fairy tales. It was built on understanding, trust, and survival. Even with the chaos around them, their love grew strong enough to build a family. Silk and Tisha had several children together, with Kin Von, real name Davin, being one of the youngest. Each child represented something bigger: hope, legacy, and a reminder that there was more to fight for than just street respect. But that also meant more to lose. Every kid became another reason for Silk to stay sharp, another reason to stay alive, and another motivation to keep winning. Their relationship existed in two worlds at once. In public, they were like royalty in their neighborhood, respected, admired, and yes, envied by many. People saw them as the perfect example of what street success looked like. A man who provided, protected, and commanded attention, and a woman who matched his energy every step of the way. Behind all the power, money, and street fame, Silk and Tisha were really just two people trying to build a real life together. But every step they took came with danger, because Silk's position in the streets meant their family was always on edge. Tisha knew the risks that came with his world, but she also understood something deeper. This was the only life he'd ever known. It was the only way he believed he could provide for and protect the people he loved from the same struggle they both grew up in. She watched Silk create something massive from nothing, an empire that demanded attention and respect. She saw how men twice his age followed his lead, how his words carried weight in rooms full of power players. But along with that respect came fear. Tisha lived with the constant thought that one day all that power could turn against him. Every time he left the house, she wondered if he'd make it back. She knew the game too well. Luck only lasted so long before the streets came collecting. Their home life was a mix of love, loyalty, and chaos. Silk was often gone, sometimes out handling business, other times meeting with people to keep his operations running smoothly, and occasionally caught up dealing with the law. His absences created long stretches where Tisha had to hold everything together on her own. That meant she had to play both roles, mother and father, keeping the house stable, making sure the kids stayed focused, and trying to give them something close to normal while their dad's name echoed through the streets. The Bennett household wasn't like other families in the neighborhood. While most kids worried about homework or playing outside, Kin Von and his siblings were growing up in a world where business meetings happened in their living room and talk about street politics was just part of the conversation. Their home was always busy. I know associates coming and going at all hours, hushed conversations about deals and rivalries, and that ever-present tension that came with living under a spotlight. Even the sound of sirens outside didn't fade into background noise.
I'm my favorite basketball player too, so LeBron James.
Well, what about when Kobe passed? Did that affect you emotionally?
Yeah, that shit.
Every time they blared, it sent a chill through the house because it could mean trouble was close. Still, Tisha did everything she could to create balance for her kids. She cooked, cared, and tried to build some sense of peace within the storm. But no matter how hard she tried, the reality of Silk's world always found its way in. Vaughn, especially was sharp. He noticed things early. He saw the way people treated his father, the respect that followed him everywhere, and he understood that his dad wasn't like the other fathers on the block. Even when Ken Vaughn was just a little kid, he could feel the power his dad carried. Whenever Silk walked into a room, everything shifted. Conversations stopped, people stood taller, and all eyes turned toward him. It wasn't fear exactly. It was that deep kind of respect that comes from knowing you're standing in front of someone who really holds weight, someone whose word could change everything in a second. Silk tried to be a father first whenever he was home, teaching lessons about loyalty, respect, and family. But those lessons came from his world, the streets, where those words had their own meaning. Loyalty meant standing strong no matter what, even when it got risky. Respect meant being firm enough to be admired and feared at the same time. And family? That meant protecting your people at all costs, even if it meant crossing lines others wouldn't dare touch. The Bennetts lived good compared to most around them. The money flowing through their home was serious, but every dollar came with stress attached. The nice clothes, cars, and opportunities all carried a quiet price, the danger that came with how that money was earned. Most families never had to think about things like that, but for the Bennetts, it was an everyday reality. Vaughn's brothers and sisters reacted in their own ways to the life they were born into. Some wanted nothing to do with it. They focused on school, tried to stay out of trouble, and dreamed of something different. Others were drawn in by the lifestyle, the attention, the respect, the way people looked at them because of who their father was. But Vaughn, he wasn't like the rest. He soaked everything up, the codes, the conversations, the moves his father made. It was like he was studying it all, even when nobody realized he was paying attention. Tisha noticed it early on, the way Vaughn's mind worked, how sharp he was, and how deep his questions went. He wasn't just a curious kid. He was observing, analyzing, and connecting dots most kids his age couldn't even see. She tried to guide him in another direction: school, sports, anything that could pull him away from that world. But the streets have a way of calling you louder when they already run in your blood. And for a boy who idolized his father, that pull was almost impossible to fight. Things got even tougher whenever Silk ended up behind bars. His time away hit the family hard, emotionally, financially, and mentally. Tisha had to step into full survival mode, raising multiple kids while keeping everything together on her own. She became the backbone of the house, juggling bills, keeping peace, and trying to fill the space Silk left behind. Those moments shaped Vaughn more than anyone realized. Watching his mom grind to hold the family together while his father's legend loomed in the background gave him two powerful lessons: what strength really looked like and how much power came with a name people respected. Those long stretches when Silk was away were tough on everyone, but for Ken Vaughn, they were especially painful. He missed his father deeply, counting down the days until Silk came home. Every time his dad disappeared, Vaughn had questions, too many for his age. He'd ask his mom about his father's business, trying to understand why he had to go away and when things would finally be normal again. Tisha did her best to explain things gently, keeping it real but age appropriate. But how could she really break it down? How do you tell a young kid that his father's caught up in something that keeps pulling him away without making it sound like either a dream or a disaster? No matter how she phrased it, Vaughn could feel that something bigger was always going on. The neighborhood didn't make things any easier. Every corner, every block was a reminder of the life Silk had chosen. Vaughn saw other kids dealing with the same pain. Fathers gone, either locked up or gone too soon. Families torn apart. Moms doing everything they could just to keep food on the table. It was a cycle that felt normal in that part of Chicago, a reality everyone knew, but no one could truly escape. But Vaughn also saw something else, the other side of that life. He saw the respect that came with his father's name, the way people reacted when they heard Bennett. Store owners would give the family credit when money ran low. Neighbors would come to Tisha asking for help, knowing Silk's name still carried weight even when he wasn't around. It was like the family's reputation worked as both a shield and a target. Protection on one side, pressure on the other. Even the police treated the Bennetts differently. Some officers who knew Silk's reputation would look the other way when Vaughn or his siblings got into small trouble. That type of treatment sent mixed signals. Vaughn saw that his father's lifestyle came with danger, but he also saw the benefits it brought. The family was respected, protected, and provided for, all because of Silk's position. It was a confusing reality for a young mind trying to figure out right from wrong. Those early years shaped Vaughn's entire mindset.
Like you need movement, go check in, go to the doctor or something. You go, little shit like that, but like, you know, it's the same shit. I just gotta move how I move and just gotta chill, be ready, don't get ready. Shit, you better.
He learned that power demanded respect, but also came with consequences. He understood that his father's choices came with heavy risks, yet they also kept the family afloat. That contradiction stuck with him forever, becoming part of the way he viewed loyalty, leadership, and legacy. But every story like Silk's has an ending, and his came suddenly, cutting through everything he built. On July 31st, 2005, a Sunday that should have been peaceful, meant for family and rest, things took a turn that no one expected. In Chicago, peace never lasts long. It's always temporary. Even legends can't stay untouched by the tension that runs through those streets. That day, Silk was outside a skating rink on 87th Street, a spot he'd been to countless times before. It was familiar territory surrounded by people he knew and trusted. This was supposed to be his comfort zone, a place where he could relax and feel safe for once. The skating rink on 87th Street was one of those rare spots where the community could unwind. Families came to laugh, skate, and enjoy a break from the stress that came with living in Chicago's tougher neighborhoods. It was a place that felt safe, familiar, and that's exactly what made it dangerous. Because in the streets, comfort can be a trap, and even a moment of peace can turn into the calm before a storm. For years, Silk Bennett had survived by staying sharp, always watching his surroundings, never letting his guard drop. His instincts had saved him more times than anyone could count, but that Sunday felt different. Maybe he was just tired of always being on edge. Maybe he wanted one quiet afternoon to enjoy the music, laugh with friends, and feel normal again. Or maybe he believed that his name alone, his reputation, was enough to keep trouble away. But according to Von's uncle, who later spoke about that day in interviews that would eventually resurface online, what happened next wasn't random at all. Silk didn't just get caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, he was targeted. What went down that day wasn't street chaos. It was something much more organized, something planned with serious precision. It's said that Silk was taken out by a long-distance suspect, not some drive-by or close-up ambush, but a professional hit that was clearly mapped out beforehand. Whoever did it had been watching him, learning his every move, and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment thing. It was methodical, cold, and deliberate. The suspect had positioned themselves far away, possibly from one of the nearby buildings that overlooked the rink. From that distance, they could stay hidden, take the shell, and disappear before anyone even knew what happened. It was clean, quiet, and planned down to the last second. The kind of setup that takes time, patience, and skill. That alone said a lot about the people behind it. This wasn't some young crew trying to make a name. This was done by professionals with real training, serious resources, and heavy connections. That type of coordination doesn't happen overnight. It takes planning, money, and people who know exactly what they're doing. Whoever set it up clearly wanted to send a message. They could have handled it up close or found 100 easier ways to get to him, but they didn't. They chose a move that showed power and reach, the kind of act that tells everyone watching, we can touch anyone, anywhere, anytime. It wasn't just about taking Silk out, it was about proving control. That moment changed everything. It reminded everyone that no matter how respected you are, how careful you move, or how powerful your name is, in the streets, nobody is untouchable. So the question is, why would someone want Silk Bennett gone so badly that they'd plan something that extreme? In the streets, whispers spread fast, and everyone's got a theory. But the most believable story points to one thing: trust. In Silk's world, your word was everything. It was your contract, your reputation, and your lifeline all in one. And once that trust was broken, there was no coming back from it. Word around the city was that Silk had stepped on the wrong toes, maybe took something that wasn't his, or broke a deal that carried serious weight. The exact details are still a mystery, lost in years of silence and street code. But one thing's for sure: whatever happened, it crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. In that world, there are rules, unspoken but ironclad. Certain lines you never cross, certain promises you never break, and certain debts that can only be paid one way. And while outsiders might think payback happens instantly, the truth is, real street justice is patient. People wait. They study, they plan, sometimes for months, sometimes even years. They watch your every move until the perfect moment presents itself, and then they strike. That's exactly what happened to Silk. His enemies didn't rush it. They played the long game. They waited until his guard was down, until he felt safe again. Then, on that Sunday afternoon outside the skating rink, the one place he probably thought was harmless, they made their move. He was likely thinking about normal things that day, his kids, his plans, maybe even the future he wanted to build. But in one blink, it all changed. There was no warning, no chance to talk things out, no room for escape, just silence, and then everything stopped. Silk was gone, just like that. For the Bennett family, it was a heartbreak that would never fade. And for the city's underworld, it sent shockwaves. When someone like Silk, a man with that much pull, that much influence, suddenly disappears, it doesn't just end one man's story. It throws the whole balance off. Everyone who knew him, worked with him, or even competed against him felt it. The streets moved differently after that day. Silk's end created a massive power gap. And in that kind of world, empty spots don't stay open for long. People rushed in, trying to claim pieces of what he left behind, trying to wear the crown that once sat on his head. But moves like that always come with chaos. As different groups fought to take control of Silk's territory, money, and name, the tension in the city rose fast. The same loyalty that once united people under Silk's rule began to crack, and rivalries exploded into open conflict. When Silk Bennett was gone, everything changed overnight. His crew, the same people who'd relied on him for leadership, protection, and steady money, suddenly had no direction. Silk had been the brains behind everything, the glue that kept the whole operation together. Without his guidance and connections, things started to crumble fast. Some of his closest associates tried to keep the business running, but it wasn't the same. The structure that Silk had built depended on his voice and his respect in the streets. Once he was gone, suppliers started backing out, sensing that the power dynamic had shifted. Rivals saw an opening and began to circle, ready to take advantage of the chaos. In law enforcement, they saw their hurt too, moving in quickly to break down what was left of Silk's empire piece by piece. For the Bennett family, the impact hit even harder. The steady flow of money that once kept the house stable dried up almost instantly. The safety that came with being Silk's people disappeared. Suddenly, Tisha and the kids were vulnerable in a way they'd never been before, exposed to the same dangers that Silk had always protected them from. But the person who felt that loss the deepest was his youngest son, David. The world would later know him as Ken Von. He was only 11 when everything fell apart. Losing his father wasn't just about missing a parent. It was like losing his superhero, his guide, his entire sense of safety. The man whose name carried power across the South Side was gone, and that left a hole nothing could fill. That kind of trauma doesn't fade easily, especially for a kid. Watching his father's story end the way it did taught Vaughn a harsh truth about life early on. Even the strongest fall. The man who once seemed untouchable was suddenly gone, and that shattered Vaughn's image of what power really meant. It became a lesson about trust, danger, and how quickly the streets could take everything from you. In interviews and lyrics years later, Vaughn talked about those sleepless nights, staying awake replaying everything in his mind, wondering who was responsible, and thinking about what it would take to stand on his own name. He'd write about that pain, about how losing Silk pushed him toward the same streets that had taken his father away. It was like the trauma became his motivation, his reason to prove something to the world. Silk's funeral became a massive event, one of the biggest the neighborhood had ever seen. Hundreds showed up from every corner of the South Side. There were family members, childhood friends, and street figures, all paying their respects to a man who had left a powerful mark behind. Some came out of love, some out of loyalty, and others just to be part of history. But even in death, Silk's name carried mixed emotions. To some, he was a legend, a provider who looked after his family and gave back to his block. To others, he represented the darker side of the streets, the chaos, the danger, and the never-ending cycle that hurt so many families. That division showed just how complicated his legacy really was. For Tisha, the funeral wasn't just about saying goodbye, it was about facing a brand new reality. Overnight, she became a single mother, raising multiple children, with no steady income and no safety net. The money that once came easy was gone, and she had to start over from scratch. She hustled hard, taking whatever jobs she could find, sometimes 2 or 3 at a time, just to keep the lights on and food on the table. When Tisha started working multiple jobs to keep her family afloat, it meant long hours away from home and that absence hit hard. Ken Von and his siblings were basically left to figure things out on their own during the most important years of their lives. For Von, that space his mom couldn't fill became an open door, and the streets were more than ready to walk right through it. Without much supervision or structure, Von naturally gravitated toward the same corners, same energy, and same type of people who had once shaped his father's life. The trauma of losing his dad so suddenly never really faded. It sat deep in him. Von didn't just lose a parent, he lost his protector, his mentor, and the living connection to the power and respect the Bennett name once carried. And in his young mind, the only way to get that feeling back was to earn it himself, in the same world that had taken his father away. People close to the family said you could see the shift in him right after Silk's passing. The once playful, goofy kid with a big smile started to change. He got quiet, more serious, more aware. It was like something switched inside him. Silk's end had awakened a darker focus in Von, a mindset built on survival, pride, and pain. Some folks in the neighborhood tried to show Von extra love, trying to help him cope with everything he'd been through. Others, though, kept their distance, scared that being too close to the Bennett family might attract the wrong kind of attention. That mix of pity and fear only made Von feel more isolated, pushing him even deeper into the streets. By the time he hit his teenage years, that innocent boy who once looked up to his father had completely transformed. The trauma, the absence, and the chaos around him shaped him into something sharper, more streetwise, more hardened. He wasn't just another kid acting out. He was a young man trying to reclaim the power he felt had been stolen from his family, but it didn't happen all at once. Von's shift came slowly, step by step. It started with little things, skipping school, staying out late, hanging around older kids who were already deep in that lifestyle. He started learning the unwritten codes of the neighborhood, how respect worked, how loyalty was tested, and how quickly trust could turn into trouble. By the time he was in 4th grade, Von was already aware of street politics. He'd seen too much, heard too much, and felt too much pain to live a regular childhood. According to what he'd later share in interviews and music, he was already paying attention to things most kids his age couldn't even imagine. He spent his time with older teens from Killer Ward, soaking up lessons about how to move smart, how to stay respected, and how to survive. Those lessons weren't taught in classrooms. They were taught on the block, in conversations, and through experiences that would harden him for good. Von wasn't born cold. Life made him that way. Every choice, every loss, and every hard moment after his father's end built him into the person he was becoming. By the time Ken Von was just 12 years old, he was already stepping into a world most adults wouldn't survive. It was 2006 when he first started getting seriously involved in neighborhood politics. At first, he was connected to a local crew known as Killer Ward, a group that had its own influence across the South Side.
So is it like different gangs out there, or is it majority just BDs?
We all same thing around that.
But because of his father's legacy and long-standing ties with the Black Disciples, it didn't take long before Von naturally gravitated in that direction. The B family had embraced his father, and now they were ready to embrace the son who carried his name and his fire. That switch from Killer Ward to the Parkway Gardens area, later known across the city as O Block, would change everything for Von. Parkway Gardens had a reputation that stretched far beyond Chicago. It was one of the roughest housing projects in the country, a place where people learned early that safety wasn't guaranteed. Residents were so used to chaos that many would sleep on the floor just to avoid getting caught in the crossfire that came with living there. This was the world where Von grew up, a place that tested everyone's strength daily. It was also where he met the people who would become more than friends. They became his second family. Names like T-Roy, Big A, J Money, and White White became part of his circle, a crew bound by loyalty, struggle, and shared purpose. These weren't just neighborhood buddies. They were young men growing up in the same storm, learning the same survival code that ruled the South Side. For Von, who was still dealing with the pain of losing his father, this brotherhood gave him something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. Being with his crew filled that emptiness left by Silk's death. They moved together, protected each other, and lived by rules that made sense in their world. But at the same time, that loyalty came with something darker. It became an outlet for all the rage and pain he'd been holding in since he was 11. Von's connection to the streets wasn't just about fitting in, it was personal. In his mind, the same kind of people who had taken his father's life were still out there. The streets had taken his family's peace, and now he wanted to take that power back. To him, proving himself wasn't about fame or reputation. It was about legacy. The only way to honor Silk's name was to become even stronger, smarter, and more respected than his father had ever been. As the years passed, Von's name started to carry weight. He wasn't just another kid hanging around the block. He was focused, observant, and ambitious. The street life was shaping him into someone with presence, someone people listened to. But then came a major turning point in his story, his 18th birthday, August 9th, 2012. That night, Von was out with his close friend, White White. The two stopped by a corner store on East 63rd and South King Drive, an area known for both danger and history. Von walked inside to grab something quick, while White White stayed posted outside near the car. What was supposed to be a regular night would soon become a key moment, one that would pull Von even deeper into the life he was already halfway living. When Ken Von stepped out of that store, everything changed in an instant. His close friend White White had been shelled, lying in the street fighting for his life. A gunman had pulled up, discharged, and left chaos behind before the police could even react. Officers on the scene returned fire, hitting the suspect, but somehow the suspect still got away. White didn't make it. He passed in the early hours of August 9th, Von's birthday. What was supposed to be a celebration turned into a nightmare that would scar him forever. That moment shattered something inside Von that was already cracked from losing his father. It was like the little bit of peace he had left disappeared right there on the pavement. Later in his music, he opened up about how watching his friend pass in front of him changed everything. That pain, that anger, that deep emptiness he'd carried since childhood finally boiled over. And from that point forward, he wasn't the same person anymore. In his mind, that day marked a turning point. The pain he'd been holding in turned into something harder, a determination to never feel powerless again. Von's energy shifted completely. His loyalty to his friends turned into a kind of fierce obsession with revenge, and his name started echoing across the city for all the wrong reasons. Between 2012 and 2014, Von's reputation grew fast. He became one of the most talked about figures in Chicago's ongoing street conflicts. Word spread about how calculated he was, how he moved, and how nothing he did seemed random. People whispered his name with a mix of fear and respect, a name that carried weight in every neighborhood conversation. But here's the thing. Von's actions weren't about chaos or ego at first. They were about emotion, about grief, rage, and a deep need to feel in control after losing so much. Still, the way he handled it took things to another level. Von didn't hide behind silence. He let his words, his tweets, and especially his music do the talking. He dropped songs that many believed contained coded messages about the street situations happening around him. He would post online right after major events, almost like he wanted people to know he was still standing strong, still untouchable. This wasn't just typical gang activity anymore. It was something psychological, something tied to identity and legacy. Von's moves during that period showed planning, precision, and patience. He didn't act out of impulse. He studied people, learned their patterns, and struck when the moment was right. It wasn't about random acts. It was about control, about sending a message that he couldn't be played with. His online posts, sometimes coming right after major street incidents, added to his growing legend.
Yeah, I ain't got no more money. This is all the money I own in my pocket. And then I'll get fucked up. Damn, Dirk, I need $2,500. So I'm like, damn, what the fuck?
Yeah.
You know? But I'm in jail. I'm thinking about jail shit. We still young. We still gang banging. It's 2011.
Fans, rivals, and outsiders all watched as he turned his life into a story that played out in real time. Some saw it as confidence, others saw it as danger disguised as pride. The first major incident that Ken Von was ever linked to happened on April 28, 2012, a day that would quietly mark the beginning of his reputation on the South Side. That night, a man named King Doc, real name Marlon Monroe, was walking into a corner store when a group pulled up and opened fire. Doc was hit right as he stepped inside and stumbled into a patch of tall weeds nearby, where he tragically passed away and wasn't discovered for hours. And it was his 16-year-old cousin, Modell, who eventually found him. That moment broke the young man completely. Imagine being that age and finding someone you love gone like that. Modell had looked up to Doc, who was known around the St. Lawrence and Eberhard area as one of the original figures from that block. Though Doc had reportedly stepped away from the street lifestyle and started working as a painter to build something better for himself, his old affiliation still lingered, and in neighborhoods divided by loyalty and turf, history never really lets go. The emotional impact on Modell was deep. Finding his cousin like that changed him forever. People close to him said that after that day, Modell became more distant, colder. He started hanging with different people, including names like Kai and FBG Duck, getting seen more often on social media, flashing signs and showing off what he carried. It was another tragic example of how the cycle of street conflict doesn't just take lives, it keeps pulling new ones in. One act sparks another, and the pattern keeps spinning. That moment was also said to mark the beginning of a darker phase for Vaughn. Up until then, he was known as a kid with potential, rough around the edges, but still young enough to turn things around. But after that, something shifted. People in his circle said it was like he crossed a line and never looked back. The incident became the first page in a story that would make Vaughn's name one of the most talked about in the city. Just 6 months later, tragedy struck again. And this time, it was Modell himself. On October 13th, 2012, Modell was walking down the street with another cousin when someone came up on foot and opened fire. Modell was hit in the chest and rushed to the hospital, but he didn't make it. The same kid who had once found his cousin's body was now gone under eerily similar circumstances. What made the situation even more chilling was what happened online afterward. Vaughn's activity on social media around that time drew a lot of attention. Posts and messages hinted at connections, and people started putting pieces together. Whether the claims were real or exaggerated, the perception spread fast, and it helped build Vaughn's growing image as someone not to be tested. For the city, these events were more than headlines. They were a reflection of a deeper pain running through entire neighborhoods. One loss led to another, and every act of revenge created another reason for someone else to retaliate. For Vaughn, though, these moments carved out his path. They turned him from a kid caught in the storm into someone who had learned to move through it, calm, focused, and feared. After the tragic end of Modell, things took a dark turn in the city, and soon all eyes turned toward Ken Vaughn. Years later, police reports that surfaced publicly revealed that a witness had identified Vaughn as the one responsible, with his close friend T. Roy reportedly being there too. That connection instantly made Vaughn the main suspect in the end of the same young man who had once found his cousin's body only months earlier. But what really caught everyone's attention wasn't just the investigation. It was Vaughn's activity online right after the incident. Police noted that Modell had been hurt around 9:30 p.m., and not even 20 minutes later, Vaughn jumped on Twitter posting, "Who died?" Just under an hour later, he followed up with another tweet, "It's not safe around our way." To outsiders, it might have seemed like random posts, but to those paying attention, the timing told a different story. This pattern of posting after serious street incidents became part of Vaughn's reputation, a kind of digital signature. It was as if he couldn't help but drop hints, using social media to broadcast his confidence to the world. Even though doing so could draw the wrong kind of attention, he seemed unfazed, almost daring people to question him. The next day, he tweeted again, saying that he and T. Roy had a problem and couldn't stop doing their thing, a coded phrase that his followers knew referred to his life in the streets. Not long after, he added another tweet, "The street's in trouble when I'm coming." The words dripped with confidence, the kind that comes from someone who feels completely untouchable. Just 2 days later, Vaughn got into a heated back and forth on Twitter with a well-known rival named Wookie. The rival had hinted online that he'd been out searching for Vaughn that same day. Vaughn's response was cold. He tweeted that he was getting t-shirts made for Model's funeral, mocking the tragedy that had just shaken the other side. It was a shocking display of boldness, something that made even his own followers pause. To many, this wasn't the behavior of someone acting out of fear or guilt. It showed a level of emotional numbness, a detachment that made him different from most people caught up in that lifestyle. Where others might have gone silent or laid low, Vaughn seemed to turn pain and chaos into performance, blending street life with digital bravado that only added to his mystique. That type of behavior, the taunting, the timing, the confidence, began to shape how people saw him. Some viewed him as reckless, while others saw him as fearless.
It really got to that point where you gotta hurt somebody or somebody trying to hurt you and you gotta protect yourself. It seemed like never really in Chicago, there's too much going on. I think must out of town or something.
Someone who played by his own rules no matter the risk. Either way, Von's name started spreading even further, becoming a kind of legend across the South Side. And the situation didn't stop there. After Modell's death, more lives were lost in incidents that police later tried to connect to Von's name. In November 2012, a man known as P5, also called Crack, was hurt multiple times in another late-night incident. Not long after, another well-known figure named Boss Trill was found with a wound to the head and later pronounced not alive after fighting for his life in the hospital. Each case added another chapter to Von's growing reputation. And whether the rumors were fact, fiction, or somewhere in between, the story built itself. By this point, his image as one of O-Block's most unpredictable figures had been cemented in both the streets and the digital world. Every time a new tragedy hit the city, Ken Von's reaction online followed the same chilling pattern. Cryptic tweets, mysterious captions, and posts that seemed to hint at what had just happened. The internet became his stage, where he mixed street reality with digital taunting, turning pain and conflict into something that entertained his growing audience. He'd post jokes, subtle bragging, and shout-outs to his circle, celebrating their wins as if the streets were keeping score. It was like social media became his diary. Each post, another trophy, another reminder that he was still standing strong while others had fallen. The way Von carried himself during that time gave people a glimpse into his mindset. He wasn't just reacting to the world, he was performing for it, blending real-life consequences with online attention. Psychologists who've looked back on his behavior point out that it mirrors traits often seen in people who develop dangerous detachment, an inability to separate real pain from the power that comes with controlling fear. Von seemed to feed off the reputation his name created. He didn't hide, didn't back down, and didn't show remorse. His words online weren't just careless. They revealed how numb he'd become to loss, both his own and others. When he mocked models passing online, it wasn't just about disrespect. It was about control. It showed a total emotional disconnect. A person who had seen so much chaos that empathy didn't come naturally anymore. That lack of emotion made him unpredictable, which in street terms made him dangerous. What made Von's story even more wild was how often he dodged serious charges. Despite being linked to multiple high-profile incidents, he always seemed to walk away untouched. It became one of the biggest mysteries in Chicago's street scene. How could someone so visible, with so much attention on him, keep slipping through the cracks? He'd get arrested, questioned, and then somehow released again and again. People started saying he was untouchable, that the system couldn't hold him even when everything pointed his way. That kind of pattern only boosted his confidence. Von started moving, like someone who believed he couldn't be stopped, like he was protected by fate or something bigger than luck. His first serious run-in with the law actually came before all that. Back in August 2010, when he was just 16, Von was arrested for allegedly being involved in a car robbery. Police claimed he and others had taken someone's vehicle at gunpoint, a charge that could have ended his freedom before his story even began. He later referenced that same situation in his track, Armed and Dangerous, saying he was arrested 2 days after his 17th birthday on August 11th. The system offered him a plea deal, 21 to 45 years. That's a lifetime for a teenager, but Von refused it. Instead of taking the deal, he fought the case and somehow avoided a long sentence. Instead, he was sent to a juvenile boot camp, a strict military-style program meant to rehabilitate young offenders by teaching discipline and structure. But that environment didn't reform Von. It only sharpened him. Instead of being broken down, he treated boot camp like another network. He met other young men from different neighborhoods, built connections, and started to understand how the game worked on a larger scale. When he came out, he wasn't humbled. He was focused. His time inside had boosted his street credibility, making his name even stronger when he returned home. To outsiders, it might have looked like a system failure, a young man slipping through the cracks again. But to Von, it was proof that nothing could stop him. Every time he walked free, it reinforced that feeling of invincibility, that sense that no matter what happened, he was always going to come out on top. When Ken Von got out of boot camp, he was free. But not for long. Just a few months later, in January 2011, he caught another case that sent him right back into the system. This time, he spent around 15 months locked up as a juvenile from late 2010 until March 2012. While he was inside, his close friend, T. Roy, kept his name alive on social media, tweeting constantly about wanting Vaughn home, a sign of the loyalty that held their circle together. But when Vaughn finally got released in March 2012, everything changed again, and not for the better. The pain from his father's death, the loss of his best friend, and the hard lessons he learned inside had all mixed into something dark. He came home different, colder, angrier, and more focused on making sure nobody ever disrespected him or his crew again. It was like a switch flipped, and the city was about to feel it. From 2012 to 2013, Vaughn's name started showing up everywhere, not just in the streets, but in police paperwork too. He was constantly getting picked up on smaller charges, things like trespassing, battery, and carrying. Each time, people assumed he'd finally get serious time, but somehow he kept slipping through the cracks. It became almost unbelievable. Every time the system tried to hold him down, he came right back out, more confident than before. But it was in 2014 that everything reached a breaking point, with a case that would follow Vaughn for years to come. It involved a young man named Malcolm Stuckey, and unlike most of the street stories tied to Vaughn's name, this one had nothing to do with rival gangs. Malcolm wasn't in the life, he was just an innocent person caught up in the wrong situation at the wrong time. According to reports, the night started off normal. Vaughn was at a birthday party, just hanging out, cooling with friends. But then things took a turn when he spotted a couple of people at the gathering who were connected to a rival crew. The tension rose instantly. The mother hosting the party noticed it too, and she pulled Vaughn aside. She asked him not to start any trouble inside her home. Vaughn promised her he wouldn't, and for a moment, it looked like he meant it. But instead of heading home, Vaughn left to regroup. He called up his friend, Big Mike, and together they made a decision that would change everything. The two came back to the area later that night, reportedly armed and ready. They parked a little down the block from the house and waited. A small group of people was hanging out outside the home, still enjoying the party, and that's when things spiraled out of control. Shells rang out and 3 people were hit.
That's when I first saw it that day.
And did you
I ain't say
communicate?
nothing to her that day.
So far this year, the GBI has investigated 82 officer-involved shootings statewide, 11 involving Atlanta police.
Among them was Malcolm Stuckey. He wasn't the target, just an innocent young man in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was rushed to the hospital, but he didn't make it. That one moment, at that one burst of chaos, became one of the most tragic and controversial events tied to Vaughn's story. What made it even more complicated was how random it all seemed. It wasn't a planned hit, not a turf battle, just a sudden devastating act that left a family grieving and the city talking. For police, this case was different. For once, they had witnesses' names and a timeline. Vaughn and Big Mike were both arrested and charged with the crime. Suddenly, the young man who had always seemed untouchable was facing the most serious case of his life. For the first time, his freedom wasn't guaranteed. And it looked like the system was finally ready to make an example out of him. According to reports, when Ken Vaughn and his associate opened fire outside that party, the crowd scattered in panic. Witnesses later said Vaughn allegedly chased after some of the fleeing guests, yelling, "Why are you running?" A chilling glimpse into the bold, confrontational attitude that had come to define his street persona. When he was finally arrested for the passing of Malcolm Stuckey in July 2014, it looked like Vaughn's luck had finally run out. This time, the case against him appeared strong. There were witnesses who had identified him, a co-defendant who was willing to cooperate with law enforcement, and prosecutors confident they could finally get a conviction. To many, it seemed like the unstoppable force of Ken Vaughn had finally met its end. Vaughn spent the next 3.5 years locked up awaiting trial, from mid-2014 to December 2017. But even behind bars, his name continued to carry weight. He wasn't the type to fade quietly into the background. Reports from inside said he got into multiple altercations with rival members and even helped start a small fire in his unit. His presence was loud, his influence noticeable, and his reputation kept growing. It was during this time that other inmates started calling him grandson, because of his resemblance both in looks and energy, to the legendary Black Disciples founder, David Barksdale. The nickname stuck, and soon it became part of Von's identity. Instead of prison breaking him, it only boosted his image. Behind those walls, he gained more credibility, more allies, and an even bigger reputation across Chicago's street world. When his trial for Malcolm Stuckey's end finally came around, it was expected to be straightforward. The state had a strong case on paper, but somehow things took a series of unexpected turns that worked perfectly in Von's favor. The main witness, who had previously identified Von as the suspect, didn't show up to testify. That alone was a massive blow to the prosecution's case. Then, his co-defendant, Big Mike, who had originally agreed to cooperate with the authorities, suddenly changed his mind at the last minute, refusing to take the stand. Without witness testimony or direct evidence tying Von to the incident, the entire case fell apart. Prosecutors could no longer meet the burden of proof needed for a conviction, and just like that, the case collapsed. In December 2017, after more than 3 years behind bars, Ken Von walked out a free man. The courtroom decision stunned everyone, including the family of Malcolm Stuckey, who were heartbroken knowing the man accused of taking their loved one's life was walking free. For them, justice never came. But for Von, the verdict felt like validation. Proof that no matter how serious the charges, the system couldn't touch him. To Von, this wasn't just freedom. It was confirmation that he was untouchable. He had beaten a passing case that everyone thought was airtight, and in his mind, that made him unstoppable. The same system that had been after him for years had failed to keep him locked up again. When he stepped out of jail that December, it wasn't just his freedom that returned, it was his confidence. He came back to the world with even more swagger, more focus, and a stronger belief that nothing and no one could bring him down. Ken Von's ability to dodge serious consequences became almost legendary, a pattern that followed him for years. Even when the evidence looked solid, something would always go wrong at the last second. Witnesses vanished, statements changed, and co-defendants refused to testify. No matter how close law enforcement got, Von always seemed to slip through their fingers. Each time it happened, it only added to his reputation as the man who couldn't be touched. When Von walked out of jail in December 2017, music wasn't even on his radar. He had no plans to become a rapper, no dreams of going mainstream. His focus was simple: get back to what he knew, make fast money, and rebuild his street presence. In his mind, fame didn't pay respect. Power did. People who knew him at the time said Von would even joke about it. He'd talk about linking up with his old circle, teasing that he might start running around with rappers just to show them how real ones move. But destiny had other ideas, and one person in particular would play a major role in changing the course of Von's life forever. That person was his longtime friend, Lil Durk. Durk had been watching Von's rise from behind bars and saw something special, something raw that most rappers could never fake. He knew Von's story had real power because it wasn't built on image, it was built on survival. The world was already fascinated by Von's name, and Durk understood that if they could turn that energy into music, it could make history. At first, Von wasn't feeling it. He didn't trust the idea of the music industry, and he definitely didn't see himself as an entertainer. To him, the rap game was full of people pretending to live a life he had already survived. He'd even once tweeted years before, saying if he ever started rapping, something must be wrong with the world. That's how serious he was about not wanting to switch lanes. For Von, the streets were his identity. The respect he had earned there meant more to him than any stage or spotlight ever could. Fame didn't impress him. Fear and loyalty did. But Durk wasn't giving up. He saw the potential in Von and knew that his story could connect far beyond Chicago. Durk kept pushing, convincing him that rap could be more than music. It could be a way to tell his truth, make real money, and finally build something lasting for his family. Eventually, Von agreed to step in the booth just to see what would happen. And that's when everything changed. The very first track he recorded was Beat That Body with F. Bizzo, another Chicago artist who had his own story of beating serious charges. The song hit hard. Raw lyrics, unfiltered energy, and pure emotion. It wasn't just a track, it was a declaration that Von had arrived. People instantly gravitated toward it because it felt real. Every word, every bar sounded like lived experience. There was no pretending, no ghostwriting, just Von telling his truth in the most unapologetic way possible. What Dirk had seen all along was finally clear to everyone else. Von wasn't just another rapper trying to make it. He was the real deal. Someone who could turn pain into poetry and reality into rhythm. That authenticity couldn't be faked, and it was about to change his life.
Just like Von, big heart. If you fuck with you, you got a big heart. If you got $10 in this, me and you, we got 5. You know what I'm saying? That's how he moved. But you don't want to see him, though. He a demon.
In ways he never could have imagined. Ken Von's first real track, Beat That Body, wasn't just music. It was a statement. The song was raw, bold, and straight from real experience. It was about two men, Von and Tizo, who had both faced heavy passing charges and walked away free. The title itself was coded street slang for beating a serious case. And the lyrics, they were so graphic and unfiltered that many listeners couldn't believe the track even made it past the studio doors. From the opening lines, Von didn't hold back. He spoke about surviving the system, the pressure of street life, and the feeling of walking out of court undefeated. But what truly made the song powerful wasn't just the subject, it was the truth behind it. Unlike most drill rappers who exaggerated or borrowed stories to build an image, Von didn't have to fake anything. Every word came from lived experience, and that authenticity hit different. Fans could feel it. When Von rapped about being in danger, about losing people close to him, about getting locked up and walking free, it wasn't entertainment, it was survival told through rhythm. His voice carried pain, pride, and power all at once. That realness instantly separated him from everyone else in the scene and turned curiosity into obsession. But the real breakthrough came with Crazy Story. This track was something special, a cinematic, blow-by-blow narrative that took listeners deep into Von's world. It wasn't just a song about the streets, it was a full story told with the precision of a movie script. Von had a gift. He could paint scenes with words so vividly that fans could see the story unfold in their minds. The music video for Crazy Story took it even further. Hurt right in Von's own neighborhood, it featured him acting out the same storyline he rapped about, blurring the line between reality and art even more. When the video dropped on World Star Hip Hop, it exploded. Within days, it racked up millions of views, and Ken Von's name became one of the hottest topics, not just in Chicago, but across the entire country. The success was wild, sudden, massive, and unstoppable. Crazy Story didn't just make waves in the local drill scene. It crossed state lines, hitting playlists, radio stations, and reaction videos everywhere. People who had never heard of Ken Von before were now glued to his music, captivated by his storytelling and authenticity. This wasn't just another rapper talking tough or flexing fame. Von was narrating the life he had lived. He brought sophistication to drill, using his songs like confessionals while still keeping the energy raw and street. It was part art, part autobiography, and fans couldn't get enough. The song's success opened doors Von had never imagined. Suddenly, he was being invited to perform at major shows, linking up with well-known artists and catching the attention of record labels ready to sign big checks. For a guy who once believed his future would be decided by a cell or the streets, this kind of success felt unreal, almost like fate had given him a second chance. But even with fame growing fast and his career taking off, Von couldn't fully separate from the world that built him. His lyrics still carried references to real situations, the past, the pain, and the people who were still out there fighting daily. His social media stayed active, filled with coded messages and street references that blurred the line between the artist and the lifestyle. His friends and associates were still deep in it too, and that connection kept pulling him back in. For Von, the fame was new, but the streets were home. The same loyalty that made him powerful in Chicago made it hard for him to walk away completely. As Ken Von's fame exploded, the tension between his street past and his new success became the core of his music. He wasn't just rapping, he was confessing. Tracks like Took Her to the O, War With Us, and Don't Wanna Be Me sounded less like songs and more like diaries set to beats. Von rapped about real-life events, mentioned names, and described situations in detail that only someone directly involved would know. It was like he was daring anyone, even law enforcement, to challenge him. He carried himself with that same untouchable energy he'd always had, confident that nothing and no one could stop him. The irony of it all was hard to miss. The same pain, loss, and chaos that had haunted Von his entire life were now the very things fueling his fame and fortune. The darkness that once nearly destroyed him had become his brand, and people couldn't look away. But success didn't erase the scars. Fame couldn't fix the pain that had been rooted in him since his father's death. Von's mindset, shaped by trauma, loyalty, and a lifetime of street lessons, stayed exactly the same. He still saw confrontation as power and conflict as normal. The money, the awards, the fame, none of it could rewire the code that had been written into him since he was a kid. His music videos showed that perfectly. Surrounded by his O-Block crew, Von proudly kept the same people by his side who had been there since the beginning, many of whom were still active in the same street politics he came from. He bought them jewelry, took them on luxury trips, and made sure they shared in his success. On the surface, it looked like loyalty.
That's like my flow. That's the flow I make when I don't got no beat. You see what I'm saying? My mom is, I ain't give her too much to say she's proud of me about, yeah. But this right here, this making, it's decent.
But underneath, it blurred the line between entertainment and real-life street business. That mix of fame and raw reality caught the attention of more than just fans. It began drawing eyes from federal investigators who were watching how his music, his money, and his street ties all overlapped. Von's lyrics were seen as stories by fans, but to authorities, they sounded like confessions backed by real connections. Even as his fame spread beyond Chicago, Von stayed the same. That Southside mentality never left him. He could be performing on major stages one night and still move like he was back in the trenches the next. It didn't matter how much money was in his account or how many millions of streams he had. His instincts stayed street. He was living proof that fame doesn't automatically change who you are inside. The most shocking proof of that came in February 2019, when Ken Von and his longtime friend Lil Durk were allegedly involved in an altercation outside the Varsity restaurant in Atlanta. According to police reports and court documents, the two, along with others, were accused of confronting and robbing a man named Alexander Weatherspoon, allegedly taking around $30,000 in cash and his vehicle right there in broad daylight. The story made headlines everywhere. It sounded unreal. Two rappers with fame, money, and everything to lose caught up in something that could have cost them everything. For Von, it was another moment that showed how deeply his mindset was rooted. No matter how far he'd come, that drive for dominance, loyalty, and survival was still running the show. It was like Von couldn't separate the world he came from the one he'd built. To him, success wasn't a reason to change. It was proof that he could live both lives at once. He was at the top of the game, admired by millions, with opportunities most people could only dream of. Yet he still found himself moving with the same mentality that once made him feared in Chicago. By 2019, Ken Von had everything most people from his background could only dream of: fame, money, a loyal team, and a global fan base that hung on his every word. But deep down, the thrill of danger still pulled at him. When an opportunity for trouble came up, he couldn't resist it. It wasn't about money anymore. Von had more than enough to live comfortably for life. What drew him in was the rush, the adrenaline, the power, the control. The excitement of taking risks still gave him a satisfaction that success never could. That's what made the Atlanta incident so shocking. Von's career was thriving. He had hit records, endorsement deals, and fans everywhere. Yet, according to reports, when a situation presented itself, that same street instinct kicked in. The case showed that despite all his achievements, Von's core mindset hadn't changed. He was still wired for confrontation, still drawn to chaos, the same traits that had made him feared back in Chicago. The Atlanta situation proved something about Von's psychology, that the streets weren't just part of his past, they were part of who he was. It wasn't about greed or need. It was about the feeling, that rush that came from moving dangerously. He was still the same man who had grown up navigating life-or-end choices. The only difference now was that he had way more to lose. When Von and Lil Durk were arrested in connection with that case, it should have been a turning point. They were facing serious charges, attempted passing among them, and the evidence seemed strong. For most people, that kind of wake-up call would have been enough to step back, refocus, and protect their future. But for Von, it was just another obstacle, another test of his resilience. Even while out on bond, facing potentially life-changing charges, Von didn't slow down. He kept dropping music, kept living the same lifestyle, and kept referencing street life in his lyrics, unfiltered and unapologetic. Fans loved it because it was real. But behind the scenes, that authenticity kept pulling him closer to danger. Then came 2020, the year that would bring one of the most controversial and tragic chapters of Von's story. In August, Chicago rapper FBG Duck, a longtime rival, was hurt and ended in broad daylight in the Gold Coast, one of the city's most upscale shopping districts. It was the kind of event that shocked the whole country. Both Duck and Von had become successful artists by that time. They were no longer struggling teenagers from the block. They were stars with fame, money, and everything to live for. But old rivalries ran deep, and according to later federal investigations, that history may have played a deadly role. Authorities claimed that Von was involved behind the scenes, allegedly funding and coordinating the hit that took Duck's life. Reports said he offered a $100,000 reward for whoever carried it out, a claim that would later lead to 5 of Von's associates being charged in connection to the passing. The situation stunned both fans and critics. If the reports were true, it showed how deeply rooted Von still was in the same mindset that had followed him all his life. Even with fame, wealth, and limitless opportunity, the old habits, the loyalty, the street code, the need to prove himself, never disappeared. The tragedy highlighted the split at the center of Von's identity. The artist who had the world in his hands, and the street soldier who never stopped playing by old rules. Despite all his growth, the thrill of control and revenge still spoke louder than the promise of peace. By this point in Ken Von's story, it was no longer about money, turf, or survival. It was personal. The long-standing feud with FBG Duck had gone far beyond street politics. This was about pride, ego, and revenge that had been simmering for almost a decade. Reports that Von had allegedly spent $100,000 of his own rap earnings to put that plan into motion painted a picture of just how deep the street mentality still lived inside him. He had everything most people from his background could only dream of: fame, wealth, and the kind of respect that reached far beyond Chicago. But somehow, it still wasn't enough. The very mindset that once helped him survive now controlled him. That old hunger, the one built on loyalty, pain, and power, never left. Even at the top of the game, Von still craved the same thrill that had followed him since his teenage years. And at this stage, Von wasn't fighting for territory or reputation anymore. He had already proven his name, already achieved everything the streets could ever offer. Yet he still found himself drawn back into the chaos, not out of fear or necessity, but because it gave him something nothing else could: a sense of control, of dominance, of power. Psychologically, it was like the part of him shaped by trauma had never healed. Despite all the fame and success, the emotional scars from losing his father, his friends, and years of pain kept fueling that darker side of him. Von didn't need validation anymore. He needed release. The danger, the power, the ability to make moves that no one else could. That's what kept him going. He continued dropping songs that hinted at past events, mixing coded messages with brash confidence. His posts on social media still carried that same tone: cryptic, taunting, and fearless. Fans ate it up, calling it authenticity. But to those who knew better, it was proof that Von was still walking the same dangerous line he always had. Even after reaching stardom, he never fully disconnected from the people and politics of his old neighborhood. The very crew that helped him rise to fame was still moving in those same circles. And Von, instead of distancing himself, kept close ties. Federal investigators later claimed that financial records and surveillance footage linked him to continued involvement in street operations, not just as a supporter, but as someone funding and guiding from behind the scenes. It became clear that Von wasn't just living two lives. He had fused them into one. The rapper and the street figure were inseparable. He'd built his success on his real story, and that story couldn't exist without the streets. It was a dangerous cycle. The same past that made him famous was also the one that refused to let him go. But the tragedy of Von's life is that his downfall didn't even come from the Chicago politics he'd survived for years. It wasn't about gang rivalries or old grudges from back home. The conflict that would ultimately take him out happened hundreds of miles away in Atlanta. And it started over something small, something petty. What began as a dispute over women spiraled into a deadly confrontation, showing that Von's quick temper and instinct for conflict weren't limited to his past. It proved that the situation wasn't just a reaction to his environment. It had become part of who he was. The streets had molded him, and even when he left them physically, he never truly escaped their hold on his mind. The feud that would ultimately take Ken Von's life didn't start in the streets. It started over love, loyalty, and pride. During his rise to fame, Von began dating fellow rapper Asian Doll, and their relationship quickly became one of the most talked about pairings in the hip-hop scene. It was passionate, loud, and messy, the kind of love that played out in real time for millions to watch online. They'd post sweet moments together one day, only to trade shells and break up the next, then make up again just as publicly. Fans were invested in every twist of their relationship. But behind the affection and flashy social media posts, there was tension, and that tension would soon collide with something far bigger. It all started when Von was seen spending time with Jania, the mother of Baton Rouge rapper NBA Youngboy's child. In August 2020, photos of the two together surfaced online, sparking instant chaos. Rumors spread that they'd been intimate, and in the world of hip-hop, especially between artists with deep followings and serious pride, that kind of move was seen as the ultimate disrespect. This wasn't about love anymore, it was about ego and reputation. In rap culture, being seen with another man's child's mother isn't just personal, it's symbolic, it's a statement. And Von, being who he was, couldn't back down from the noise that followed. Instead of staying quiet or brushing it off, he leaned into it, fully. He dropped songs like Mine Too, where he boldly addressed the situation head on, rapping about being with both women and making it clear that he didn't care how NBA Youngboy felt about it. That was classic Von, direct, unapologetic, and unwilling to let anyone think they could get one over on him. It wasn't about music anymore, it was about dominance and respect. But on the other side, NBA Youngboy wasn't letting it slide either. Soon after, snippets of his own songs began circulating online, lyrics that eerily referenced someone from out of town who was chasing after women and ending up dead. Fans couldn't ignore the parallels. Whether it was coincidence or intentional, those lines added even more fuel to a situation that was already burning hot. What had started as gossip had now evolved into something serious, a collision course between two camps with reputations that demanded they stand their ground. Both sides had pride, both had power, and neither was backing off. Then came November 5th, 2020, the night that would change everything. Ken Von had just wrapped up a performance at a popular Atlanta nightclub called Opium. The show was a success. The crowd was hyped, the energy electric. Afterward, Von's team planned for him to head straight back to his hotel to wind down. But in true Von fashion, he made a split-second decision that would prove fatal. Instead of calling it a night, Von decided to pull up to Monaco Hookah Lounge, a local spot where Kondo Rondo, one of NBA Youngboy's closest friends, just happened to be hanging out with his crew. It wasn't planned, it wasn't scheduled, it was pure impulse. The kind of spontaneous move Von was known for making when emotions were high. His team tried to convince him otherwise, urging him to stay out of the drama and keep things focused on the music. But Von wasn't wired that way. Once he made up his mind, nothing could stop him. To him, this wasn't about business, it was about principle. He wasn't going to let anyone think he was scared, not even for a second. What happened next would be caught on multiple security cameras, footage that the internet would analyze frame by frame for months. Outside Monaco Hookah Lounge, chaos erupted. Ken Von approached Kondo Rondo and, without hesitation, swung first, throwing punches with raw emotion, right there in front of a packed crowd. This wasn't a setup or a planned move. It was Von acting purely off impulse, the same fire that had defined him his whole life taking over one final time. But Kondo wasn't alone. His friend Lul Tim was nearby. The second he saw Von attacking, instinct took over. Not recognizing Von and seeing his friend in danger, Tim pulled out his tool and discharged. The shells hit Von multiple times, and within seconds, the scene exploded into chaos. People screaming, ducking, running for cover as gunfire lit up the Atlanta night. Von was hit 4 times. His crew reacted immediately, some returning fire, while others tried to pull him to safety. When the smoke cleared, multiple people were injured, some fatally. The moment was fast, brutal, and heartbreaking, and the irony of it all was impossible to ignore. The man who had survived countless close calls, who had allegedly taken lives and walked free, who built his entire image on survival and strength, was taken out, not in a gang war or an ambush, but in a random altercation that had nothing to do with the streets he'd ruled for so long. Ken Von passed away at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta on November 6, 2020. He was only 26 years old. News of his end hit like a bomb across the rap world. Fans, artists, and entire communities struggled to process it. Social media flooded with disbelief. Some mourning the loss of a raw talent, others reflecting on the complicated legacy he left behind. Von wasn't just another artist. He was one of the most authentic voices in drill, someone who lived everything he rapped about, for better or worse. But back in Chicago, the reaction was mixed. For those who had lost friends or family in the situation tied to Von's name, his end felt like closure, an end to a chapter of pain that had haunted their city for years. For others, it was just another reminder of how endless the cycle of situation really was. Almost immediately, tensions flared again. Members of Vonzo Block Circle made threats toward NBA Youngboys camp, while Kondo Rondo and Lil Tim found themselves both in the legal system's sights and in the streets' crosshairs. It felt like the situation wasn't ending, it was mutating, spreading from Chicago to Atlanta, from the real world to the digital one, with threats and taunts flooding every corner of social media. For Tisha, Von's mother, her son's end brought heartbreak and stability all at once. The pain of losing another loved one to the streets was unbearable. Yet, ironically, the same bad legacy that had taken everything from her was now providing for her. Von's music, filled with stories of trauma, pain, and loss, exploded in streams and sales after his death. His posthumous albums and merchandise lines brought in millions, ensuring the Bennett family would never struggle financially again. Every stream, every sale, every replay meant more money for the family, a twisted kind of success born from tragedy. Tisha, who once worked long hours just to keep food on the table after Silk's death, was now living comfortably, all because of her son's words, his story, his pain. The irony couldn't be ignored. Ken Von's end achieved something his life never could. It brought his family wealth and security, but the cost was too high. No amount of money could replace the people she had lost. Both Silk and Von had been consumed by the same streets that now paid their family's bills. The Bennett legacy had come full circle, success soaked in sorrow. Critics were divided on how to remember him. Some praised his music for its authenticity, calling him one of the most gifted storytellers of his generation. Others saw him as a cautionary tale, a man who turned real pain into art but never escaped the situation that came with it. To them, celebrating Von meant ignoring the destruction his story left behind. The lives lost, the families hurt, and the influence his bad image continued to spread. But whether loved or criticized, one thing is undeniable. Ken Von left an impact that can't be erased. His story, from the south side of Chicago to the top of the rap charts, embodies both the glory and the darkness of chasing respect in a world built on survival. The Bennett family legacy now stands as both a lesson and a warning. It's a reminder that in the streets, even kings eventually fall, and that the price of power, revenge, and pride always comes due. Von's story shows how success and destruction can grow from the same roots, and how fame can never erase the pain that built it. Ken Von's music will live on, inspiring new generations of artists who see pieces of themselves in his struggle. But let it also serve as a message. No matter how high you climb, the past will always chase you if you never learn to let it go. If you made it this far, hit that like, share, and subscribe button to keep following stories straight from the block, raw, real, and unfiltered. Stay tuned to see what's happening next in our hood.